Two Soviet scientists published an unusual hypothesis about the Earth's satellite in which they tried to unravel the question about the origin of its creation. Thousands of years ago, the moon aroused the fascination of ancient peoples who idolized it and dedicated all kinds of rituals to it. Today, the Earth's natural satellite continues to provoke that same admiration in humans, who began to study it in greater depth from the moment American astronaut Neil Armstrong stepped on its surface for the first time in 1969. From that moment, scientists undertook the task of unraveling one of the questions that kept them awake: the origin of its creation. There are many theories that tried to explain the origin of the moon. From scientific research that stated that it originated as a result of the collision of a protoplanet called Theia with the Earth, to slightly more extravagant proposals such as the one that claimed that the moon is hollow. This particular theory began in the middle of the last century when the Apollo 12 crew intentionally dropped the lunar module on the surface of the star on November 14, 1969. Seismographs placed on the satellite recorded a sound that numerous experts described as the of a gong or a bell because it was ringing for 8 minutes. A year later, Apollo 13 had to cancel its mission due to technical problems and launched the expendable Saturn rocket on the moon. This impact sounded similar to the lunar module discarded in 1969. Although on this occasion, seismographs detected that the star rumbled for more than 3 hours. These unusual events led some scientists to speculate that the satellite could be hollow because they could not otherwise explain why the sound would vibrate for so long after a small impact. Ken Johnson, supervisor of NASA's Apollo missions, said, "Not only did the moon ring like a bell, but the entire star wobbled so precisely that it gave the impression that there were gigantic hydraulic shock absorbers inside." In the early 1970s, scientists Alexander Shcherbakiv and Mikhail Vasin from the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, became the two greatest exponents of the unusual theory of the hollow moon by publishing an article titled, "Is the Moon a Creation of Intelligent Beings?" In the essay, the researchers presented a surprising scientifically based hypothesis and also stated that the satellite is an artificial structure created by an alien race. Although a long time ago, science began to wonder if the canals on Mars were the creation of cosmic engineers, for some strange reason they did not look with the same eyes at the peculiarities of the lunar landscape. And arguments about the possibilities of intelligent life existing on other celestial bodies have been limited to the idea that other civilizations must necessarily live on the surface of a planet, and that the interior as a habitat is ruled out. Shcherbakiv and Vasin wrote. In the magazine Sputnik, published from 1967 to 1997, and which had that name in honor of the satellite launched into orbit by the USSR in 1957. The scientists presented the details of the hollow moon theory in the Soviet publication that was also published in different languages such as English, French, German, Spanish and Portuguese. Abandoning the traditional paths of common sense, we have immersed ourselves in what at first glance may seem like wild and irresponsible fantasy. But the more we examine all the information collected by man about the moon, the more we become convinced that there is not a single piece of information that would rule out our assumption, Shcherbakiv and Vasin stated. According to Russian researchers, the moon would be an artificial satellite placed in orbit around the Earth by intelligent beings from a highly developed civilization. Shcherbakiv and Vasin stated that it was a kind of giant and very old spaceship, the interior of which was filled with fuel for the engines, materials and tools for repairs, instruments for navigation, observation equipment and all kinds of unimaginable machinery. Everything necessary for this caravel of the universe to serve as a kind of a Noah's Ark for the extraterrestrials, and perhaps even as the home of an entire civilization that anticipated a prolonged existence of billions of years and long trips through space of billions of kilometers, they indicated. Soviet researchers warned that the alien spacecraft needed to be protected against collisions with interstellar objects. And for this reason, they developed a particular interpretation to explain the shapes and sizes of lunar craters. According to Shcherbakiv and Vasin, the surface of the Moon, like the external structure of a spacecraft, must be strong to withstand meteorite impacts and strong fluctuations between extreme heat and cold. The helmet probably has a double layer to fulfill different functions: the base, a dense armor located about 3.5 kilometers deep, and on the outside, a cover of a thinner layer of dust that protects that shield. In some areas, where the seas and lunar craters are located, the upper mantle is much smaller, and in some cases, non-existent, they wrote. To prove this last conjecture, Soviet scientists cited the study of fellow physicist Kirill Stanyukhovich, who put forward the theory that lunar craters are the result of a bombardment of the natural satellite over millions of years. And he called it bombardment because even the smallest celestial body, when it collides head-on with another object in the cosmos, behaves as if it were a nuclear warhead, leaving a huge crater after the impact and explosion of the collision. According to Professor Stanyukhovich, a meteorite would have to penetrate the Moon to a depth equal to 4 or 5 times its own diameter. This means that, if a fireball 10 kilometers in diameter collided with the Earth's satellite, it would have to enter between 40 and 50 kilometers on the lunar surface. Taking this formula into account, Shcherbakiv and Vasin established that it was impossible that the large meteorites that collided with the Moon had not left footprints deeper than 4 kilometers. For example, Aristarchus is a crater 40 kilometers in diameter that is 3.7 kilometers deep. At first glance, one would expect to find a much deeper crater, but nothing of the sort is observed. What actually happens is that when the meteorite collides with the outer shell of the Moon, it plays the role of a shock absorber and the foreign body finds itself against an impenetrable spherical barrier. The explosion only slightly dents the layer of armor beneath the dust on the lunar surface, but it sheds chunks of the Moon's protective coating, which we estimate is 3.5 kilometers thick, which is the approximate maximum depth that all craters on the Moon have. Shcherbakiv and Vasin argued. Regarding the chemical peculiarities of lunar rocks, Russian scientists indicated that their North American counterparts found chromium, titanium and zirconium. All of them are metals with refractory, mechanical and anticorrosive properties. A combination that has enviable heat resistance, as well as the ability to withstand an aggressive environment. If a material had to be devised to protect a gigantic artificial satellite from the unfavorable effects of temperature, cosmic radiation and meteorite bombardment, experts would probably have recommended these metals. Wasn't it the same combination that the alien designers looked for to protect the Moon? Questioned the Russian scientists. According to Shcherbakiv and Vasin, from an engineering point of view, this ancient spaceship we call the Moon is magnificently built. The researchers detailed the reasons for its extreme longevity, although they ruled out that it still harbors extraterrestrial life. We do not imagine that the Moon is still inhabited, and probably many of its automatic devices also stopped working, such as the stabilizers. Although the satellite maintains the same face turned towards us, for some time it has been wobbling on its own axis, sometimes showing us part of its reverse side that was previously invisible to observers from Earth, they argued. For Soviet scientists, the time elapsed caused the ship's technology to be damaged. Both the fuselage and the instruments were disintegrated to some extent. Some seams of the inner shell evidently separated. Therefore, we assume that the long chains of small craters that were previously attributed to volcanic activity were produced by gas eruptions through cracks that appeared in the armor and as a result of accidents, they explained. They added, one of the most splendid features of the lunar landscape, a straight wall almost 500 meters high and almost 100 kilometers long, was formed as a result of one of the armor plates being bent by the impact of meteorites. And one of its straight and uniform edges was raised. Shcherbakiv and Vasin deduced that the Moon's inhabitants took steps to address the effects of the meteorite bombardment, such as patching holes in the outer shield that covers the inner shell. For this, a substance was probably used inside the lunar core, with which a kind of cement was made. Once processed, This component was sent through pipes to those places on the surface where it was needed, they said. And they delved into the assumption that the Earth satellite is damaged and needs repairs. Astronomers discovered variations in gravitational fields near large seas. We think the reason is that the Moon's seas are actually areas where the protective layer of the armor plating was torn off. To repair the damage in these vast expanses, the facility that produces the repair substance would have to have been immediately brought to the site to be able to flood the area with its cement, they stated. And finally, Shcherbakiv and Vasin raised their extravagant position, although they invited reflection. What is the Moon today? A colossal necropolis, a city of the dead where some form of life became extinct? Or a ship abandoned by its crew and controlled automatically? Pending definitive evidence, our hypothesis may seem far-fetched, but we believe that the questions we have raised provide sufficient support for serious consideration of the matter. The result may be the clarification of many lunar enigmas, they concluded. Thanks you for watching the video. If you want to learn more about aliens mysteries, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you in the next video.